I called OSHA on my workplace, and nobody knows it was me. What happened next shut down our entire spa for a week and exposed health violations that could have killed someone. The ceiling was literally collapsing, toxic mold was spreading through our treatment rooms, and management's solution was to put a trash can under the waterfall and call it atmosphere. I'm Melody, and I'm 31 years old. This story is about doing the right thing when everyone else chooses to look the other way, and the moment I realized that sometimes being the whistleblower is the only way to protect people you care about. Let me take you back to where this all began. I've been working as an esthetician for almost 8 years now, and 3 years ago I landed what I thought was my dream job at Serenity Springs Spa, part of a high-end wellness chain with locations across the Pacific Northwest. The spa was located in this beautiful converted Victorian mansion in downtown Seattle, with original hardwood floors, ornate crown molding, and these gorgeous stained glass windows that made the whole place feel like a sanctuary. When I first interviewed there, I was completely enchanted by the atmosphere. The reception area had this elegant fountain, soft classical music playing in the background, and the most luxurious treatment rooms I'd ever seen. The pay was excellent, the clientele was upscale and respectful, and my colleagues seemed like genuinely caring professionals who took pride in creating transformative experiences for our guests. During my first year at Serenity Springs, I felt like I'd found my professional home. I specialized in advanced facial treatments and chemical peels, building a loyal client base of women who trusted me with their skincare concerns and often became friends over the months of regular appointments. There's something deeply satisfying about helping someone feel more confident in their own skin, and I love the combination of technical skill and nurturing care that my job required. My colleague Ramona, who did massage therapy, became my closest friend at work. She'd been there for 5 years and knew everything about the spa's operations, from which treatment rooms had the best lighting to how to handle difficult clients with grace. We'd often eat lunch together in the small break room, sharing stories about our most challenging cases and dreaming about eventually opening our own wellness center someday. "This place has such good energy," Ramona would say, gesturing toward the treatment rooms where we spent our days helping people relax and rejuvenate. "I can't imagine working anywhere else. The clients love us, management treats us well, and we're actually making a difference in people's lives." I agreed with her completely during those first months, feeling grateful to work somewhere that aligned with my values and allowed me to use my skills in meaningful ways. The problems started subtly, as these things often do. During my second winter at Serenity Springs, I began noticing small water stains on the ceiling in the hallway connecting the treatment rooms. At first, they were barely visible, just slight discoloration that I assumed came from minor leaks that had been fixed. The building was over 100 years old, after all, and some settling and minor repairs were to be expected in a structure with that much history. But as the rainy Seattle winter progressed, those water stains began growing larger and darker. What had started as faint brown marks became obvious patches of discoloration that spread across several ceiling tiles. I mentioned it to our spa manager, Vivian, during one of our monthly team meetings, thinking it was something that should probably be addressed before it became a bigger problem. "Oh, that old building," Vivian said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's always had little quirks like that. The corporate office knows about it, and they'll handle any necessary repairs during our slow season. Nothing to worry about, just cosmetic stuff from the building's age." Her casual attitude made me feel like I was overreacting to something normal, so I dropped the subject and focused on my client appointments. Ramona had noticed the stains too, but she seemed to share Vivian's relaxed perspective. "Every old building has these issues," she told me during one of our lunch breaks. "My apartment has water stains from the upstairs neighbor's bathroom, and it's been like that for 2 years without causing any problems. As long as it's not actively dripping, it's probably fine." Her reasoning seemed logical, and I trusted her experience with the building's quirks. By early spring, however, the situation had clearly escalated beyond cosmetic concerns. The water stains had transformed into obvious bulges in the ceiling tiles, creating these ominous-looking bubbles that seemed to grow larger each week. More concerning, I'd started noticing a faint musty smell in the hallway, particularly on humid days or after heavy rainfall. The scent wasn't overwhelming, but it was definitely present and seemed to be getting stronger over time. During one particularly busy Saturday, I was walking between treatment rooms when I heard a concerning creaking sound from above. Looking up, I could see that one of the ceiling tiles was sagging significantly, weighted down by what was obviously accumulated water. The tile looked like it was barely holding together, and I found myself unconsciously walking faster through that section of hallway, worried about what might happen if it gave way completely. That's when I decided to document what I was seeing. Using my phone, I took photos of the worst ceiling damage, the growing water stains, and the areas where the musty smell seemed strongest. I wasn't sure what I planned to do with the photos, but some instinct told me that having visual evidence of the deteriorating conditions might be important later. The images were honestly shocking when I looked at them together. What had seemed like gradual changes looked dramatic and dangerous when captured in photographs. I showed the photos to Ramona, hoping she might help me figure out the best way to bring these concerns to management's attention more forcefully. But her reaction surprised me. "Melody, you're going to get yourself labeled as a troublemaker if you keep pushing this," she said, looking uncomfortable as she scrolled through the images. "Vivian already addressed your concerns, and corporate is aware of the situation. Sometimes you just have to trust that the people in charge know what they're doing." Her response made me question my own judgment. Was I being overly anxious about normal building maintenance issues? Was I creating drama where none needed to exist? Maybe my perfectionist tendencies were making me see problems that weren't actually serious. I decided to give management more time to address the situation, assuming that they had plans in motion that I wasn't aware of as a regular employee. But then came the morning that changed everything. I arrived at work on a Tuesday in late April to find a scene that looked like something from a disaster movie. One of the ceiling tiles in the main hallway had completely collapsed overnight, leaving a gaping hole surrounded by chunks of wet plaster and debris scattered across the carpeted floor. Water was actively dripping from the opening, creating a steady stream that had soaked into the carpet and was spreading toward the treatment room doors. The smell that hit me when I walked through the front door was overwhelming, not just musty anymore, but a strong, nauseating odor of mold and decay that made my eyes water. Several of my colleagues were already there, standing around the collapsed ceiling and looking stunned by the extent of the damage. Chunks of wet plaster were everywhere, mixed with what looked like insulation material and dark, slimy substance that I didn't want to identify. "This happened sometime during the night," said Kendra, one of the massage therapists, gesturing helplessly at the mess. "The cleaning crew found it this morning when they came in. Look at all this water damage, it's been building up there for months, maybe longer." She was right. The amount of water and debris that had come down suggested this wasn't a sudden pipe burst, but rather the culmination of long-term leaking that had finally reached a breaking point. Vivian arrived about an hour later, and her reaction was to immediately start damage control rather than address the underlying problem. "We'll need to block off this section of the hallway and reschedule any appointments that require walking through here," she announced, surveying the destruction with what seemed like annoyance rather than concern. "I'll call a cleanup crew and see how quickly we can get this area functional again." That's when she implemented what became the most absurd solution I'd ever witnessed in a professional setting. Instead of closing the spa for proper repairs, Vivian had maintenance bring in a large industrial trash can to place under the hole in the ceiling. The water was still actively dripping, so she positioned this gray metal garbage bin to catch the constant stream, creating what sounded like a loud, rhythmic pinging noise that echoed through the entire spa. "There," she said, as if she'd solved the problem completely. "That should contain the water until we can get the roof repairs scheduled. We'll put up some caution tape and make sure clients know to walk around the area carefully." The sight of this elegant, high-end spa with a garbage can serving as a permanent water collection system was so ridiculous that I initially thought it had to be a temporary measure for a few hours at most. But days passed, and the trash can remained. The constant pinging of water drops hitting metal became the soundtrack to our workdays, drowning out the peaceful ambient music that was supposed to create a relaxing atmosphere for our clients. The musty smell grew stronger, spreading from the hallway into the adjacent treatment rooms and making it difficult to breathe comfortably during long appointments. My colleagues started making jokes about the situation to cope with the absurdity. "Welcome to our new water feature," Ramona would say to clients, gesturing toward the garbage can with forced cheerfulness. "We like to call it the Tranquility Falls." Kendra dubbed it our meditation fountain, and soon everyone was referring to the industrial trash can as our calming waterfall or serenity cascade. But beneath the humor, I could see that everyone was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the conditions. Clients would wrinkle their noses when they walked through the spa, clearly noticing the smell and the bizarre sight of a garbage can positioned under a hole in the ceiling. Some of our regular customers started asking questions about when the construction would be finished, obviously concerned about the air quality and professional appearance of a place where they were paying premium prices for wellness treatments. The situation reached a crisis point about 2 weeks after the initial ceiling collapse. I was preparing for a facial appointment when I noticed that water stains were now appearing on the ceiling of treatment room 3, which was directly adjacent to the original damage. The familiar bulging and discoloration patterns were spreading, indicating that whatever was causing the leaks was affecting a much larger area than anyone had initially realized. During my lunch break that day, I decided to do some research about mold exposure and workplace safety regulations. What I found made my stomach drop. Extended exposure to water damage and mold growth can cause serious respiratory problems, allergic reactions, and long-term health complications. Workers in affected environments are supposed to be protected by specific safety protocols, and employers are legally required to address hazardous conditions promptly. I learned about OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and their role in protecting workers from unsafe conditions. Their website had detailed information about mold exposure, water damage, and the steps employers must take when buildings have structural problems that could affect employee health. According to everything I read, our spa was clearly violating multiple safety regulations by continuing to operate with active water leaks, ceiling damage, and obvious mold growth. That evening, I found myself lying awake thinking about the legal and health implications of our working conditions. We were spending 8 to 10 hours a day in an environment with known mold contamination, breathing air that could be causing long-term damage to our respiratory systems. Our clients were being exposed to these same conditions, paying for relaxation treatments while unknowingly inhaling potentially toxic substances. The next morning, I tried one more time to address the situation through proper channels. I requested a private meeting with Vivian and presented my research about mold exposure, workplace safety requirements, and the potential liability issues the spa was facing by continuing to operate under these conditions. I brought printed articles about health risks and OSHA regulations, hoping that presenting factual information would motivate her to take immediate action. Vivian's response was dismissive and slightly hostile. "Melody, I appreciate your concern, but you're not a building inspector or a health expert," she said, barely glancing at the materials I'd prepared. "Corporate is aware of the situation, and they're handling it according to their timeline and budget. Your job is to focus on your clients and let management handle operational decisions. I don't want to hear any more complaints about building maintenance issues." Her tone made it clear that pursuing the matter further through internal channels would likely result in disciplinary action or termination. But walking away felt impossible when I knew that continuing to work under these conditions was potentially dangerous for everyone involved. That's when I realized that sometimes doing the right thing requires going outside the normal chain of command, even if it means risking your job and relationships with colleagues. That night, I sat at my computer and navigated to the OSHA website's complaint filing section. The process was surprisingly straightforward. They had online forms specifically designed for reporting workplace safety violations, with clear instructions about what information to include and what to expect during the investigation process. The site emphasized that complaints could be filed anonymously and that retaliation against employees who report safety concerns is illegal. I spent over an hour carefully documenting every detail of our situation. I described the timeline of the water damage, the ceiling collapse, the visible mold growth, and management's inadequate response to the hazardous conditions. I included information about the number of employees and clients being exposed daily, the location of the spa, and specific details about the treatment rooms that were showing signs of contamination. The hardest part was providing enough detail to make the complaint credible while maintaining my anonymity. I had to be specific about conditions that any employee would observe, without including information that would obviously point to me as the source. I mentioned the industrial trash can solution, the spread of water damage to additional rooms, and the persistent musty odors that were affecting the entire facility. Before submitting the complaint, I read through it several times, making sure I'd included all relevant safety concerns while keeping the tone professional and factual. The OSHA website indicated that investigations typically begin within 30 days of receiving a complaint, but they prioritize cases involving immediate danger to workers' health and safety. I pressed submit around midnight, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety about what I'd just set in motion. The next few days at work felt surreal. I went through my normal routine of client appointments and colleague interactions, knowing that I'd initiated a process that would likely result in major disruptions to our workplace. Every time Vivian walked past my treatment room, I wondered if she somehow suspected that I'd filed the complaint. Every conversation with Ramona felt slightly strained because I was keeping such a significant secret from my closest friend at work. But I didn't have to wait long for results. Less than a week after filing my complaint, I overheard Vivian on a phone call that made it clear OSHA had already contacted the spa. "I don't understand how they found out about our situation," she was saying, her voice tense with stress. "Someone must have called them, but I have no idea who would do that. Yes, they want to schedule an inspection for next week. No, we can't postpone it." The mixture of satisfaction and nervousness I felt hearing that conversation was intense. My complaint had been taken seriously and was already generating the kind of immediate response that months of internal discussions had failed to produce. At the same time, I was acutely aware that my anonymous report had just triggered events that would affect every employee at the spa, not just me. Over the next few days, I watched Vivian become increasingly agitated as she tried to prepare for the OSHA inspection. She had maintenance crews working overtime to address the most obvious problems, but there was no way to hide months of water damage and mold growth in just a few days. The industrial trash can was finally removed, but the hole in the ceiling was simply covered with a plastic tarp that looked even more obviously temporary and inadequate. The day of the inspection, I felt like I was holding my breath from the moment I arrived at work. The OSHA investigators arrived mid-morning, two serious-looking people in official jackets carrying clipboards, cameras, and what appeared to be air quality testing equipment. They spent several hours documenting the conditions, taking photographs, and collecting samples from areas with visible mold growth. I watched through the window of my treatment room as they examined the ceiling damage, tested the air quality, and interviewed Vivian about the spa's response to the safety issues. Their expressions grew increasingly concerned as they discovered the extent of the problems, and I could see them making extensive notes about conditions that were clearly unacceptable under workplace safety regulations. By afternoon, it became clear that the situation was more serious than even I had realized. One of the investigators was wearing protective equipment while collecting samples from treatment room 3, where the water damage had spread. They were treating the contamination as a significant health hazard, not just a maintenance inconvenience that could be managed with a trash can and some caution tape. That evening, Vivian gathered all employees for an emergency meeting. Her usual confident demeanor was completely gone, replaced by obvious stress and barely controlled panic. "We're going to need to close the spa temporarily while we address some building maintenance issues," she announced, avoiding eye contact with the staff. "OSHA has identified some concerns that require immediate attention, and we can't continue operating until those issues are resolved." The questions from my colleagues came fast and worried. How long will we be closed? Will we still get paid during the closure? Are we safe to be working here? Why didn't management address these problems sooner? Vivian's answers were vague and unsatisfying, clearly indicating that she didn't have a solid plan for handling the crisis that had developed. That night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions about what I'd accomplished. Relief that the dangerous conditions were finally being addressed properly, satisfaction that my complaint had resulted in immediate action, but also guilt about the financial impact on my colleagues who would be without work during the closure. I hadn't fully considered how reporting the safety violations would affect everyone's income and job security. The spa remained closed for almost 2 weeks while extensive remediation work was completed. Professional mold removal specialists had to tear out contaminated carpet, replace damaged ceiling tiles, and treat affected areas with specialized cleaning solutions. The water leaks were finally properly repaired, involving major roof work that should have been done months earlier when the problems first appeared. During the closure, I received unemployment benefits and spent time networking with other estheticians in the area, partly as a backup plan in case the spa decided not to reopen or started laying off employees suspected of filing complaints. I was constantly worried that somehow my role in the OSHA investigation would be discovered and I'd face retaliation when we returned to work. When Serenity Springs finally reopened, the transformation was remarkable. The musty smell was completely gone, replaced by the clean, fresh air that should have been present in a wellness facility all along. New carpet had been installed throughout the affected areas, and the ceiling repairs were professionally completed with no signs of the water damage that had plagued us for months. Most importantly, the treatment rooms now felt genuinely safe and healthy. The air quality was noticeably improved, and I no longer worried about exposing clients to potentially harmful conditions during their appointments. The professional mold remediation had addressed contamination that was apparently far more extensive than any of us had realized, even in areas that hadn't shown obvious signs of damage. My colleagues seemed relieved and grateful to be working in a properly maintained environment again, though there was definitely some ongoing resentment toward management for allowing the problems to reach crisis levels before taking action. "I can't believe they let it get that bad," Ramona said during our first lunch break after reopening. "Someone should have called OSHA months ago." The irony of her comment wasn't lost on me, but I simply nodded and agreed that the situation had been handled poorly by management. The secret of my complaint felt like a weight I'd carry permanently, but it was a burden I was willing to bear knowing that I'd helped protect everyone's health and safety. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you'll never get credit or recognition for your actions. In the months that followed, our workplace culture definitely shifted. Vivian was eventually transferred to another location, probably as a consequence of how badly she'd mishandled the safety crisis. Her replacement, Marcus, was much more responsive to employee concerns and implemented regular building maintenance inspections to prevent similar problems from developing. The spa also invested in better ventilation systems and upgraded several other aspects of the facility that had been neglected for years. It was clear that the OSHA investigation had prompted corporate management to take a much more serious approach to workplace safety and building maintenance across all their locations. About 6 months after the closure, I ran into one of the OSHA investigators at a coffee shop near the spa. She recognized me as an employee and mentioned that the Serenity Springs case had been one of the more serious workplace safety violations she'd encountered that year. Whoever reported those conditions probably prevented some serious health problems for a lot of people, she said. Mold exposure at those levels can cause permanent respiratory damage. Her words confirmed that filing the complaint had been the right decision, even though I'd never be able to openly acknowledge my role in protecting my colleagues and clients. The validation from an expert who'd seen the conditions firsthand helped resolve any lingering doubts I had about whether I'd overreacted to the situation. Today, almost a year later, I still work at Serenity Springs, and the spa operates as the safe, professional wellness facility it was always supposed to be. The experience taught me that sometimes being an anonymous whistleblower is the only way to protect people when normal channels fail to address serious problems. I've never told anyone, not Ramona, not my family, not even my closest friends, that I was the one who called OSHA. Part of me feels guilty about keeping such a significant secret, especially from colleagues who benefited from my actions without knowing it. But another part of me recognizes that some acts of service are meant to remain private, valued not for the recognition they bring but for the protection they provide. If I had to do it again, I wouldn't change anything about my decision to file that complaint. The temporary inconvenience and financial stress of the spa closure was far outweighed by the long-term benefits of working in a safe environment. None of us should have been exposed to those conditions for as long as we were, and management's refusal to address the problems left me no choice but to seek outside intervention. The experience also taught me to trust my instincts when I see something that seems dangerous or wrong. The pressure to go along to get along in workplace situations can be intense, especially when colleagues and supervisors dismiss your concerns. But sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up for safety and health, even when, especially when, nobody else is willing to do so. Looking back, I realize that my anonymous OSHA complaint wasn't just about fixing a leaky ceiling or removing some mold. It was about refusing to accept that profits and convenience should take precedence over people's well-being. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is challenge a system that's failing to protect the people within it. I sleep well at night knowing that I helped ensure my colleagues and clients can breathe clean air and work in safe conditions. Even though nobody knows I was responsible for the changes that made that possible, I know I did the right thing. And honestly, that's enough recognition for me. Sometimes being the person who does what needs to be done means being the person nobody thanks, and I've made peace with that reality. The important thing isn't getting credit for solving problems, it's making sure problems get solved, regardless of who gets acknowledged for making it happen.